Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas. This should be dropping on the 26th of December, and we've decided to sort of take the week off. We're not going to cover a new topic today. We just wanted to come on and say, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever you're celebrating. We want to be inclusive of everybody. It's sort of like, my philosophy is always, I want to celebrate every holiday. More holidays, the better.
Absolutely.
When people say, this is my holiday, I say, good, it can be mine too. I'll take it. I don't care.
That's right. I'll take it. I'll own it. No problem.
Exactly. I want to learn them all. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for you and I just to say, we've been at this almost 6 months. I'm having a lot of fun doing these. I think you and I are both learning. We're learning from each other. We're learning from the topics as we do more research on it and more, learning. And I think next year we're planning to do a little bit of deeper dives on some of the conversations we've already had. So that's going to be something to look forward to. But I just wanted to ask you, give us some thought. What are you thankful for from this last year? What's sort of top of your mind that you're most thankful for?
This year's been just a great year for me for learning a lot of new things. I've been working a lot on some different projects. Working with Brian's been an absolute joy. It's been learning. I'm thankful for all the learning that I've done. I feel like I knew a lot already, and I kind of had a lot of things, but I was also pretty complacent in what I knew. Like I know that and that, and I wasn't really in that learning mode. But I've really been in learning mode this whole year on many levels, not just in terms of technical stuff, but also just personal stuff and how to be a business owner and how to make stuff happen. And I just really, really enjoyed that. So I'm thankful for that opportunity to learn and to grow and to keep meeting new people and hearing new challenges and working with that. What about you, Brian?
I was going to say, we've always sort of joked that we have twin brains because for me, it's the same. Being able to spend more time with you and creating, our partnership and, moving forward on, business ventures has been fantastic because it's opened my brain. I'm learning so much. And the word complacent is a great word because you do in life. We get bogged down in our daily activities. And I don't know about you, but you can blink and 6 months goes by, Well,
and honestly, especially when you're good at something and you've done something for a long time. Right? It's really easy to go, yeah, I got this, right? I got this.
Yep.
And at some point, it's like, you gotta not got this to learn and to grow.
Exactly.
Right. You got to get to that place of, I don't know how to do this. How do I figure this out? And that's really where growth happens.
Well, you and I did that when you one day said, I think we should do this. And we had already talked about going out and teaching together and things. And you said, I think we should do a podcast. And I was like, that's awesome. Because I'd thought about it, but it's one of those things that it's an idea, but you don't really have, the time, energy, money, any of that kind of stuff. But it was like, yeah, what's stopping us? Let's do it. And I was in radio. So for me, it's like, I got this. I can do this.
Which is fabulous for me because I'm like, well, I can talk to a microphone, but I know nothing else. So when you said, yeah, and I knew that you had done radio. And I'm like, Brian has that capability. Fantastic.
Let's just do it. And so just so the listeners know, what we did was we bought the equipment and we said, let's get together. Let's get together in a hotel room. We were at Pilates on Tour, Monterey.
Monterey, I think. Yeah.
And it was in February, and it was just like, let's just get together and record. Who knows what it's going to sound like? Let's just do it. So I thought what would be a kick. Let's do today. I'm going to repost our very first episode, warts and all, because literally this was the first time that we had ever pressed any of these buttons on this board. This is the first time we'd ever done anything like this. And it was like, okay, we had no theme. It was kind of like, let's just get together and talk. I remember at one point, Al walked into the room and we both looked at each other like, well, we never thought about this. What are we going to do now? It was just, it was so, fly by the seat of your pants and fresh and fun. And it was an adventure that neither of us had really been on before. So I thought it'd be fun to repost that. And like I say, warts and all, hopefully we've gotten better. I think our topics are, we're having fun with them. We're learning a lot. And this will show you where we started from. And hopefully you guys will get a kick out of listening to this and be like, wow. And hopefully you'll think that we've improved, hopefully. But yeah, I thought that it might be fun to do that.
Perfect. All right, you guys, you ready for a little blast from the past? I feel like when you do that music, that heart music that goes da 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 da.
Exactly.
Right into the past.
Exactly. So,
or we can do the vault, like right, opening the vault and taking something out of the vault.
I was even thinking a little rewind from like a record player backwards.
Yeah.
Exactly. So enjoy, guys, our first episode, and we will see you after the new year with a brand new topic. We're going to talk about winterizing your body. But before we get into our first episode, if you're listening to Moving Conversations with Nora and Brian, do us a favor. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe so you can get the latest episode in your feed as soon as it's published every Tuesday morning. If you're enjoying the show, please give us a 5-star rating. It helps with all those algorithms and gets our show out to more people. So the better the response, the more people that can hear us. Our email is movingconvos@gmail.com. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter is @movingconvos. And here is our first episode. Enjoy. Welcome to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is
Nora St. John.
Yes. I thought this is going to be our first dive into this endeavor. We've created this podcast for movement professionals by two people who have been doing movement training for
decades. We'll just leave it at decades.
Yeah,
Brian.
let's just say
let's just leave it at decades.
Long time. So please bear with us. This is new to us. I've had a lot of radio experience in the past. We've had a lot of speaking experience in the past, but podcasting is something new to us. So this is a new endeavor. And I wanted to first have an introduction of who the two of us were. And so I'm going to let Nora start off. Please give an introduction as to who you are, your background, etc.
Nora St. John. My primary background is really in Pilates. I have been the education program director for Balanced Body for many years, developed their teacher training program and all their curriculum. I learned Pilates from many of the Pilates elders and have really taken the approach of looking at movement from a scientific perspective within the environment of the Pilates repertoire and the Pilates apparatus. So really looking at all the different aspects of how do you refine movement, how do you train movement, how do you correct movement patterns, and understanding really the fun part about movement, the depth and the detail, and really seeing if you can improve somebody's abilities and life through movement.
Where'd you start?
I started my movement background starts as a kid. I was always a kid that liked complicated stuff. Ice skating, tap dancing, gymnastics, dancing of all kinds. Those were really my movement modalities. Not a competitive sports girl, not a runner. But I loved things that were complicated, involved music and rhythm and momentum. I broke my foot when I was a professional dancer, broke my foot when I was 27, and ended up at St. Francis Hospital in San Francisco, where they had one of the very first and oldest, at this point, Pilates and for rehabilitation programs in the country. It was at the Center for Sports Medicine. We're part of the Dance Medicine Division. And Dr. Garrick there, who was one of the orthopods who started the Center for Sports Medicine at St. Francis, he loved working with dancers. He was a knee guy. And so he worked with a lot of dancers. And he was just intrigued because there was not a lot of specific rehabilitation for dancers at that time. And dancers have very complex movement patterns, a lot of very, very specific aesthetic and athletic needs in terms of what they're doing. And so he was just intrigued by dancers and started to work with a woman named Patrice Whiteside, who was a principal dancer with Oakland Ballet. And they were looking at how do you rehab dancers? How do you actually develop something? Because typically what would happen in the past is dancer would go in, they'd get an injury, they'd have surgery, and the doctor would be like, kind of good luck. Like you have to figure out how you're going to get back to your full level of performance. And so St. Francis was founded to really develop that skill in dancers.
It seems necessary, doesn't it? I mean, doesn't it make sense that if you want to get an athlete back, athletes have always had athletic trainers and whatnot, and physical therapists get them back, but dancers didn't have that back then.
Not much. There was very few people. There's some people in New York, people in LA, and then the Center for Sports Medicine in San Francisco were kind of the main hubs of anybody who was really looking at dance for rehabilitation. Like, how do you actually get somebody back to full performance potential? There's not a lot of money in dance, right? There's a lot of money in athletic sports.
True.
So if you're a football player, it's really important to get you back on the field because you're going to make money for somebody. Dancers, not so much.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So you started doing that and then branched into, how did you get to, let's bridge that gap between St. Francis and Balanced Body? What'd you do in the meantime?
So St. Francis, I was injured. I ended up there as a client. I was there for about 6 months. And after about 6 months, they said, do you want to work here? And at that point, Pilates was pretty much an apprentice-only game. There were very few there were really no training programs to speak of. There were no manuals. You would just go and work for a while, and then you would start to teach. So I learned as an apprentice, and did that for 11 years-ish, working primarily with clients in a medical environment. So they could be weekend warriors, they could be professional dancers, professional athletes, just somebody who had a sports-related injury, knee issues, back issues, neck issues, shoulder issues, that kind of thing. And so we really learned to use the Pilates environment to rehabilitate and to improve their performance for people of all kinds of different physical issues, musculoskeletal primarily.
Nice.
Yeah, and then from there, ended up meeting Kenny Endelman from Balanced Body because he was our equipment supplier, and I was the only one who knew how to repair equipment. So if anything went wrong, I'd call him up and say, hey, Ken, what do I do here? And he'd say, okay, get out this wrench and do this and this. And then at one point in 2000, I decided I wanted to start a conference, actually. And I founded Body, Mind, Spirit, which was the first Pilates, yoga, gyro, Nia conference on the planet. And in that, I basically went up to Ken and said, hey, Ken, do you want to bring $200,000 worth of equipment down to this convention center? And Ken said yes, foolish man that he was. And we had 750 people at that conference, and then it grew for a few years after that. And that's really how I got to work with him closely. And then after a few years of that, we started Pilates on Tour, which was an event specific for the Pilates community, and with Balanced Body in conjunction with them. And then we started the educational program at Balanced Body in 2005.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. Just so anyone listening knows, we're actually recording this in Monterey, California, at a Pilates on Tour. So this is something that we've always had a passion about. And something that you and I have always done is get together and talk.
Yep.
So I can't tell you the first time we did it. I think it was probably Anaheim or something, where we just said, let's go chat. And 4 hours later, we're still talking. And we're just talking about every concept under the sun. And usually it's about movement. And my start from this is I started, my movement started actually from my mom.
Okay.
Because my mom was an aerobic instructor. I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii, actually in Kailua, and she was one of the first aerobic instructors in our area. There was only one place that did aerobics, Jane Fonda days, and she was fascinated by it, loved it, and she started doing it, started teaching it, created a dance company. Now, I was obese, I was a big old kid, but I moved well and I loved to dance. Well, when she would have her dance classes, I always danced.
As a little kid?
As a little kid. So
nice.
I'd be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, whatever it was. I'd be in the back of the class and I'd be doing the choreography right along with them and having a blast. I loved to do it. So for me, dance always came natural. And then in college, when I got into theater, I was always, quote unquote, the big guy who moved well. Uh-huh. Because I could dance, I could pick up choreography because I learned from my mom. So if I went out for something, they'd be like, wow, I didn't expect that from you. You move well. They didn't say I could dance. You move well. So that really taught me that, okay, I am a mover. And for me, my background in fitness really came later after I had lost weight and got into more fitness. And my mom had left aerobics but started doing personal training, and I started working with her. And so that's where my love of fitness came in. I was one of these guys, because she had been doing this for so long. First time I walked into a gym, I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew how to create a routine, and it's because you absorb things from your parents. So I was literally absorbing all this information on such a regular basis that I went in and I knew exactly how to do what I was doing, which was pretty fascinating, you know. And as a kid, you think you know everything anyway, you know, but I really sort of understood. And I went to the University of Hawaii, got my degree in kinesiology and exercise science, and really fell in love with movement and how the body's supposed to move.
So let me just step back from a moment there. So you really learned, I wouldn't say intuitively, but you learned movement in your own body, right? And I think of you as the class mascot, because it must have been, I don't imagine it was a lot of young men with you.
No. I was in the back. I was the one who pushed all of the cafeteria chairs out of the way so we could have the cafeteria of a school to do our classes in. Yeah.
I love it. And then when you grow up with that, when you grow up with movement around you, and I love a lot of the people I know that have kids who are into this thing, whether it's Pilates or whether it's personal training, they learn the way you did. Like you just hang around the studio long enough and you start to just understand stuff. And you aren't conscious necessarily that you're learning, but you are just by being in the environment and hearing the words and seeing the movements and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So when you went to the university, how did you feel like that influenced or changed your understanding of movement? What did that add for you?
Well, let me say this. When I first went, I was a drama major.
Oh, well, there you go.
Ended up in drama. Did that for a couple years. Loved it, but realized you ain't gonna make no money. So I went from drama to English to communications because I worked on radio. So I went to communications. Then I was dating someone who basically said, you do know you need to leave school sometime. And I'd been hearing that from my parents for a little while too. So I was like, okay, so I just want to figure out what's the least number of classes I can take to get out of here. So I thought, okay, it's gonna be English, no problem. And one day I was literally walking in a part of campus I had never been before, down by the Stan Sheriff Arena. And I saw this sign that said HPER, hyper. What the heck is that? And I mean, I'm looking at the thing, what the heck is that? And I went inside, I just was nosy. I went inside and it was health, public education, and recreation. And it had a degree, a BS in kinesiology and exercise science. And I just immediately went, that's it. Little did I know that was a 5-year degree. Little did I know I only had 1 year of prereqs for it so far. So I went for another 4 years. Even though I was really supposed to be getting out soon, no, I started over.
So much for finishing in a short period of time.
Yeah, exactly. But I fell in love, and I went from being a good student to suddenly acing every class because everything I could put through the human body. And I was learning things that suddenly was my passion. And I had gotten into this. My mom had shattered her knee. I was working at a coffee shop, and I was in college working, trying to sustain myself as an actor sort of thing. And she shattered her knee skiing, and she said, look, I'll probably lose my personal training business. Will you come and help me? So I quit my job and I went to work for her. We had 3 days. I had to become a group exercise instructor because she taught many classes a week and a personal trainer. And we had 3 days for me to learn this. So I said, okay. And we did it. And I worked with her, and I worked with her for years after that. So I had this knack for understanding the human body, which I loved. And then when I started learning about it in school, it was sort of, oh my gosh, this just makes sense. And I went to massage school, and oh my gosh, this makes even more sense and how the body's supposed to move. And so for me, that was always my passion. And then fast forward a few years, I realized that in working for my mom, I was doing a lot of rehabilitation work and not even realizing it. It's just who came through the door. And then when I moved from Hawaii to the mainland, and eventually I became the rehab guy at a gym because I knew how to work with people like that. And then I started getting into medical exercise and becoming certified in it. And that's become my passion, is working with people with injuries. So rehabilitation has really become my bread and butter, and what 95% of the people that come to me have a medical condition. And it's really about getting those people to get away from being injured, mentally as well as physically, and getting them on the right track, sort of getting them into being able to move better, and I wanted to let everybody know how you and I met was really about language.
Yeah. We had the same language. So Brian and I have chatted many times, but the first time was at an IDEA conference in Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. area. And it was an IDEA personal trainer. And Brian came over because we had the core line there. I was there on behalf of Balanced Body, and we had the core line there. And Brian came over, and we started showing him exercises on it and talking about it. And one of the things about the core line is it's really about literally aligning the core. There's a lot of core work that goes into it. There's a lot of postural work. There's a lot of feedback.
Describe what it looks like.
Yeah, sorry. The core line is basically a ladder, like if you want to think of an L that has a ladder on the top part of the L, and then the bottom part of the L is essentially a tray, if you will, or a square, a rectangular piece of equipment that has 2 tracks, and each of the tracks have a cart that can roll independently in the 2 tracks. And you've got resistance from either the front or the back, lots of different ways to do it. But essentially, it's a little like you could be standing on it, holding onto the ladder in front of you, and moving your legs alternately as if you're walking. So replicating gait, kind of. It feels a little bit like a Nordic track in a way, except that the carts are independent and there's way more variability in terms of where the resistance comes from than there is in something like a Nordic track. But it's essentially like you can walk on it, you can do planks on it, you can stand, you can sit, you can use your hands, you can use your feet, lots and lots of options, very versatile. But we started talking about it for specifically posture work and low back work, because Brian does a lot of that, and I've always done a lot of that. And I've met a lot of people over the years, especially in my role at Balanced Body, and Brian was like, oh, we used exactly the same language. We understood each other, and that's not common, honestly. Very often people have very different paradigms that they're working in, very different theoretical backgrounds for whatever training they're doing. And Brian and I just clicked immediately and spent, I think, I don't know, two or 3 hours going through every possible exercise and talking about, case studies and clients and applications. And that was really how we got connected. It was great.
And it's been a relationship that we've been fostering ever since. And, I now work with Balanced Body. I teach for Balanced Body, at Pilates on Tours, and IDEA stands for International Dance and Exercise Association, one of the largest conferences. We teach at all of these, and we had been teaching, separately, and then came on board. You invited me to come on board, and that relationship has just grown. And the thing that we always come back to is movement. And that's why we wanted to create this podcast, was to talk about movement. What is movement? Because in reality, everybody moves. Every sport, if you think about a sport, there's all these movement patterns. If you think about aerobic dance, group exercise, there's all these movement patterns. If you talk about weightlifting, you talk about Pilates, you talk about yoga, it's all about movement. And it's all about what is good movement versus what is not so good movement.
And one of the things that Brian and I particularly think about, or one thing that I think has always been really useful to me about these conversations that we have, is Brian comes from a fitness background, from, again, a medical exercise background where I think we overlap more. I come pretty much from a Pilates background and a dance background. And so every time we have a conversation around a topic, I've got a particular perspective from my background, and he's got a related but different perspective from his background. It's like even if we've got the same goal in mind, he's got a repertoire of exercises that are quite different often than my repertoire of exercises. And so I always learn something in that process of like, oh, so you put resistance over there and you do this thing. And that's really, for me, been a lot of the value and the benefit of us talking about movement not from one perspective, but really looking at it from as three-dimensional as we can get, being 2 people.
Absolutely. And the thing that I think we realized is that for years, everybody thought of fitness as having its own bubble and Pilates as having its own bubble, when in reality, it's a Venn diagram. And for a lot of people, it's got a lot of overlap without you even realizing it. I remember one day I had mentioned to you something about, I should probably get Pilates certified and things, and you said, but you're already doing a lot of Pilates. And a lot of the floor work that I do in what I call foundation work, is a lot of mat work. And when I took mat 1, I thought, well, yeah, I've been doing all of this.
Yeah.
It's just movement.
It's just movement.
And that's the key, is it's just movement depending on whatever apparatus you're using, whatever tools and props you're using. I may use a Viper or a cable machine. You're using a reformer or a trap table or a prop. It doesn't matter. It's how you load the body. It's how the body moves in space.
And it's understanding the principles. What are you trying to do with that body? One of the things that I know was really helpful for me in terms of my background coming up, through Pilates, but Pilates in a rehab setting, was it was constantly about problem solving. Right? They can't move their hip because they just had replacement, or they can't move their low back or whatever, but I'm trying to activate their core muscles, or I'm trying to activate their rectus spinae or something. And how am I going to get that activation to happen or that movement to happen for that client with whatever limitations or lack of limitations they had? And so rather than looking at it as, okay, I'm going to do, buys, tries, pecs, and flies, or whatever. And rather than looking at it as a formula, it was always about, how am I going to solve this problem? How am I going to get this movement pattern, strength, flexibility, whatever it is, in this body?
Absolutely.
And that's the same approach you've had.
Everything comes down to a why.
Why? Yeah.
100%. If you don't understand why you're doing something, you're wasting your time, your client's time, and more importantly, their money. So for me as a personal trainer, every single exercise I do has to have a why component.
Yep.
And sometimes it's just to have fun.
Yeah.
And sometimes
totally legitimate.
It's variety. But in general, there's a specific reason I need to engage their transverse abdominis, and it's not working on their back in supine, so now I'm going to put them in quadruped, or I'm going to get them standing. Or, look, they've been doing all this core work, great, lying down, but as soon as they stand up, all their core goes away. Okay, how do I load them now to get that activation so that when they go to the grocery store and they have to open the freezer that someone just slammed and suddenly there's a big vacuum there and they can't open that freezer door, they have the core strength to be able to do it without injuring themselves. So taking that functionality of life and bringing it into what we do was always very important, and that was my why behind every single exercise. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of personal training and a lot of group exercise and a lot of things. People just exercise.
Yes. And one of the things that I think is important to say here, at least this has been my experience, is learning how to teach Pilates, how to be a personal trainer, how to teach group exercise. There is a beginning level. Remember, both of us are educators here. There's a beginning level of teaching, which is just, I need to know the steps, whatever it is, or I need to know the routine I'm going to be doing and how the equipment works. And I'm going to follow the general routine for a while. Right? So as a beginning teacher, you need to just do the work and get used to and familiar with how the equipment works, how bodies respond to it, et cetera. And so there's a lot of programs that really start with, ideally a well-developed why as a general program that's appropriate for a large part of the population. And then you just do that program and things will get better. Brian and I are talking a little more about often that next step. When you've already got your skill level, you've already understand how a lot of different bodies will respond to a squat or a lunge or whatever, and how you might correct those different variations you might see. And that's really a lot of where we want to dive into, is that step of you understand how the equipment works that you're working with, or the environment you're in, and you understand a bit about the body. You've looked at enough bodies to kind of get a sense of that. But then how do you refine that? How do you look more deeply at it? How do you keep your mind open to the possibilities and the potential for that body in front of you?
Yep. And that's really what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be doing a deep dive every single week and trying to figure out different topics and things that you'd be interested in, first of all, but also going into various conditions, medical conditions. So let's say you do have a low back issue, or you have arthritis, or something like that. We're able to help you or your client out with those things, or at least give you some thoughts as to, okay, here's some thought processes. Here's maybe where you want to focus your attention. And so every week we're going to be coming to you, bringing you more on movement patterns, what we think good movement is versus poor movement, and hopefully getting some topics out there that you may not have thought of yourself. If so far you like what you've heard, do me a favor, hit subscribe so every week you can come back and hear what we have to say. We'd love to hear from you as well. We have an email. It's Moving Convos. Our name is Moving Conversations, so movingconvos@gmail.com. So please email us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have your topics. We're going to be covering different things every week. seeing as how we're talking about movement, this week I really want to, this week we went into a big thing on introduction, but I want everybody to know who you and I are. And so we got that out of the way. Next, okay, so let's answer this question. What is good movement?
What is good movement? This is
this is a big question.
A big topic, and we'll riff on it a bit. And hopefully, like a lot of our thoughts here is just to spark your thinking process, right?
Exactly.
To give you some little thought bubbles or thought seeds to kind of put in your head to see if it makes you think about movement a little bit differently. When I think about what is good movement, what is that famous saying like about pornography that I can't define it, but I know what it is when I see it?
100%.
Good movement. When you're walking down the street, for example, and if you haven't done this, if you aren't inclined to this, which those of us who are crazy movement people do a little too often, just take a look around you and you will almost immediately start to consciously, when you make it conscious, categorize people into good movers and bad movers. They're graceful. They seem to know what their body's doing. They've got good range of motion. That person looks really awkward and really uncomfortable. So there's a natural way in which our body responds to good movement and responds to less than optimum movement.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that is innate. There is part of our nervous system and part of our perceptual system that sees grace, fluidity, symmetry as better, and I'm making a arbitrary judgment call there, than asymmetry, than a lack of rhythm in movement or a lack of coordination in movement. So that's a very broad stroke there.
And something to think about, if you've never been a people watcher, I highly recommend this. If you are fairly new to the industry, or even if you've been at this for 20 years or something, go out there and just watch people, because you're going to spot things. And your job is not to diagnose anything. It's not to know why. It's just, what do you see? I tell the story in some of my classes. I remember it was early in my relationship with my wife, and we were walking around this sort of man-made pond near our home. And we're walking behind a couple who's walking in front of us, very attractive younger couple. And I started feeling this energy, this, what I call piss mist. I could feel someone was getting upset with me, and I realized it's because I'm staring. My wife thought that I was staring at the woman in front of us, very attractive, and I realized this, so I sort of giggled to myself, and all I asked her was, "What do you see?" And she was, and I said, "No, what do you see? Here's what I see." And I just started breaking down what I was watching in their walk. And she actually said, "You can't turn this off, can you?" I said, "No, I can't."
No, I can't.
I cannot turn this off at all.
It does not go away.
But I highly recommend, if you don't do it regularly, go to the mall. I was just through an airport coming out here. I sit there and I just watch people. And you can spot some people whose gaits are, you can see that one stride is longer than the other, or you can hear that one stride is longer than the other. And could it be because that bag is too heavy on their one side? Are they limping? Are they, leaning their body over? All this kind of stuff. And it's just fun to watch. And like I say, I'm not diagnosing. I don't know these people. But it's fun to watch what's going on and to see if I can spot something and to see who the good movers are. Because some people just float gracefully through the airport. It's like, wow, they move really well. And other people who look like they should move well because they're fairly young or whatnot, you're like, ooh, something happened to them.
They got some work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, observation. And one thing that I like to say here too is, especially if you're a newer trainer, even if you're not a newer trainer, there is a place where you've got to learn to trust what you see. And then and how I think about this is you trust what you see, but you also start to understand what you see, and then you start to be able to break down a bit of what you see. Mm-hmm. Right? Like you're walking through a supermarket, for example, and somebody's got a really antalgic gait, meaning they really look uncomfortable. It's like clearly there's something going on where they don't want to put weight on their right leg or whatever it is. And you start to look at that, you kind of notice it. And your first step there is just, what am I seeing? Mm-hmm. What's working, maybe what's not working. Then as you go through it, you're like, okay, what's working there, what's not working there? Is their right foot going faster than their left foot? Which side are they not putting weight on? Does it look like it's in the hip? Are they moving the knee? Are they moving the ankle? Are they moving the hip? And you just start to take those observations of like, wow, that looks awkward, to why is that awkward? Where is that coming from? And you don't know, again, to Brian's point, I have no idea, but I just will take a thought experiment of like, is their foot funny? Is it the knee? Is it the ankle? Is it the low back? What's happening there? Where does it feel like the most awkward point is, or where the force isn't transferring?
Mm-hmm. Something interesting, too, is when we do assessments, because you and I have done thousands and thousands of assessments. Well, first of all, everyone should be doing assessments, and that'll be another podcast for another day. But when someone first walks into me, the assessment starts from when they're walking in the door.
Yep.
I watch them move.
Yep.
How do they get up and down out of a chair? Do they sit down? When they're signing in, when they're filling out the paperwork, do they sit down? Do they not? Oh, maybe they don't feel comfortable sitting down. Okay. All these things are registering in my brain as they walk in. Can they get out of a chair? Do they use both hands? Do they cross their legs? Do they slouch? And a lot of these things I'm not jotting down, and it's not as though I'm consciously going through a checklist, but it's an unconscious checklist.
Well, you're noting, are they comfortable? Are they moving well? Are they not moving well? Are they confidently moving from coming in, taking their shoes off, or putting their shoes on, or changing their clothes, getting out of here, sitting down? Yep. Or is there tentativeness in that process? And at what point in that process does it look like they're moving slowly or carefully?
Absolutely. And also what I find is we are people pleasers. So in an assessment environment, as soon as I say, I want you to stand here, and I step back with a clipboard, suddenly they're standing at attention. You think they're suddenly in the military. You're like, no, wait a minute. No, relax. But if they don't know they're being watched, so when I bring them from my office out onto the floor, after you, and I just stand behind them and I watch them walk. They don't know I'm watching them yet. But if they knew I was watching, they would change.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, observation, you want to observe them in the most relaxed environment possible, so that they don't know you're looking at them. But the more you can tune your antenna to watching how bodies move, you're going to be able to see what's good and what's bad. Now, for everyone who may listen to this, I need to say this. Do not start putting your own biases or what you think you see into the person in front of you. And that happens to everybody. We all do this. We go to a conference, we take a class on the shoulder, then suddenly everybody has shoulder problems. We don't want to do that. Just jot down what you see. A mentor of mine once told me, 10 from 10. Look at them for 10 seconds from 10 feet away. If it's not glaring, it doesn't exist. If I stare at you hard enough, I can make anything happen.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Rule of 10. 10 feet away, 10 seconds. That should tell you everything you need to know about their posture or what's going on as you're watching them walk. Don't overdo it. Just what do you see? Boom, 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 boom.
And what sticks out? Because something will stick out or it won't. Some clients like, nothing sticks out. Great. Some clients like, okay, what's sticking out? Their hip, their low back, their posture, their shoulders, right? That's what that you look at. Another thing that's part of that is your biases take many forms.
Sure.
Right? I'm reminded of one client who I had a long time ago. It was in a core line class, I think, actually, where she had been taught as a young girl that when you sit down, you should keep your torso entirely upright and perpendicular to the wall, basically, or parallel to the wall, right? So you should never lean forward as you would in a natural squat to sit down. And this was how you should sit down. This was how you should do a squat. It was very strongly embedded in her belief system that this was how you squatted, period. You did not flex at the hips. You did not bring your shoulders over your knees. You just sat down like your back is against a wall.
Biomechanically, that's just
you
wow.
might want to try that now. It's a little bit of a challenge. It's an interesting challenge, but it's a little bit of a challenge. And it was one of those really interesting moments because, I gently tried to suggest that perhaps there were other ways to sit down. And her belief system would not let her change. It really would not let her sit down in another way. Like she Yeah.
trying to get out of a chair. They think they need to sit perfectly upright, which is why they use their hands so much, trying to get up, and that their feet have to be out in front of them because they heard or read somewhere that your knees should never, ever, ever, ever go out in front of your toes because that's going to, destroy your body somehow. And the first thing I have to do is teach them, get your feet underneath you. It's okay. Now, it's okay to use a little bit of momentum. Rock forward a little bit, lean forward, push down with your feet, stand up. And as soon as they do it, they go, oh, that's easy. Like, okay, and you have not been able to stand up without your hands for how long? But it's about, changing their mindset.
Right, that isn't a physical limitation.
No.
That was entirely, in both situations, a belief system about movement.
Yep.
That was limiting their ability to move well.
And we see that a lot. We see that a lot with clients that come to us because a lot of this is ingrained, especially when you see older clients. They're patterns that have been ingrained for so long and so many years that sort of comes to the question for you and for me. Let's try and figure this out. With a pattern like that, how difficult is that to change? How long should we expect it to sort of change? And is it something that can change?
This is what we do, right? As movement professionals, mostly we're working on trying to change people, honestly. Trying to change their movement patterns, change their attitudes, get them to exercise. Like we're working on changing whatever is going on. They typically aren't going to come to us unless they want something to change, right? If they want things to stay the same, they're not going to come to you because things will stay the same. So change is exactly what we do. It's the crux of the matter, if you will. It's mental, it's physical, it's emotional, it can be financial, right? It can be relational. And all those things come into play in terms of somebody being willing to change a pattern or not. So this is definitely going to be a freewheeling conversation. So starting to think about clients who come in and they're willing to change, they just don't know how. Okay, what does that mean? Like, even that they're willing to change, that's good. You got to start with their motivation, or at least their willingness. But then you start down the path with them sometimes, and where you're trying to take them doesn't make them happy. Right? They don't want to change that much, or they don't want to change in that way. And I'm thinking, as a case study here, I had a young dancer who had a lot of anterior hip pain. And she also had rather large gluteals. And if you've ever been a dancer, you know that the major thing you're trying to do in dance is get rid of your butt forever. And so she had really been trained as a ballerina to tuck like mad. And when you really tuck the glutes under and you press the hips forward for year after year after year, she's been training for a long time at this point, you put a little pressure on the front of the hip joint, right? The acetabulum and all the labrum and stuff. You get a little bit of pressure through the front of the hips. And in her case, I knew, because just my past experience, that if she would just not posteriorly tilt her pelvis quite so much, that her femur would kind of roll back and some of the pressure would get off of the front of her hip.
Yep.
But for her, again, her ballet training was like, I cannot ever let my butt not be in this position. And as long as she was dancing and was still in the performing mode, she was not willing to make that change.
Sure.
Once she actually finally retired, because I knew her for a long period of time, she's like, okay, now let's work on my pelvis. Because she wasn't even willing to do it to change a pain pattern. Like, that wasn't motivation enough based on her belief system that this is how she had to move. So then we had to so then we start to work on it. And as soon as she was willing to let go of her need to be in that position professionally, it changed, her hip pain went away, life was beautiful. But it took her being willing to let go of that thought process and make that change that was necessary to actually get herself out of discomfort.
Absolutely. It's interesting you say that. I had something similar, but it was actually when I was teaching in Seattle. I taught a course on low back pain. Someone came up to me afterwards, two people, two of the most beautiful bodied people you could ever imagine. And in fitness, we see this all the time. These two people were just total Instagram model looking people. And the guy came up to me, he was probably in his early 30s, and he said, I have had low back pain for the last 5 years, and it's killing me. It's killing me. And I took one look at him. I said, turn around. He turned around. And I said, how long per day do you stand there squeezing your butt? he goes, what do you mean? I said, you haven't let go of your butt the whole time that I have been talking to you. And he goes, and his girlfriend whacked him and said, I told you, stop squeezing. He wanted to look good, and he had a great rear end. Let me say, he did. But he squeezed it all the time. And he'd been taught in every exercise to squeeze it. And when you're just standing there, squeeze it so you can develop it. And that was causing his low back pain.
Yeah.
And I said, do me a favor, just let go of your butt for a second. Just let go. And take a deep breath. Wow, the pain just went away. It was something as simple as that.
Yeah.
But those sort of training methodologies or whatever were so ingrained that he couldn't let go of that.
Right.
To make that change. Fortunately for him, it was pretty simple, whereas for your case, because she wasn't ready to let go, she couldn't make that change.
Yeah, not until she was willing to actually say that another movement was going to work for her.
Yeah.
The other thing that I want to bring up, because I think you brought it up a little bit around the back door on that last one, is this is presumably something he was taught or told.
Absolutely.
Right? If you want a good booty, you're going to keep that engaged the entire time in your whole life. Like, you're never going to let that sucker go. And one of the things that is a responsibility from, at least I see it as a responsibility as an educator or a movement teacher, is your language has power, right? If you say, oh, you should never do that, or oh, you should always do that, or well, if you really want to, tighten up this part of your body or get more flexible, you need to do this. We need to be aware of our own biases and our own belief system. I think of in the Pilates world, since so much of our instructors and our elders came from the dance world, there was a lot of dance biases that came into the method. Working in more external rotation than a lot of people do. Joseph Pilates didn't do that. He actually worked in a fairly moderate external rotation because that was the most restful position for standing, right? Soldiers don't stand in parallel, they stand in a slight turnout because it's more stable. But, dancer comes in and it's like, oh, well, turnout is good, so I'm going to work on turnout. Or my shoulders need to be away from my ears, away from my ears, away from my ears, away from my ears. Or I really got to slide those shoulder blades into my back pocket. Some of you have heard these cues, I'm sure. And for some clients, that's fantastic. For other clients, that flattens out their thoracic spine. It increases the tension on the muscles around their neck and around their shoulder, and it isn't really what they need. But a lot of us have heard, this is what you're supposed to do, and then we reiterate that, we repeat that to every client that comes in, more or less regardless of what's happening with them. And that's also something just to look at. What are we saying? Is that useful for the client in front of us? Is it applicable for the client in front of us?
Let me ask you a question, because I'm fascinated by this with Pilates. I have had a number of clients go to a Pilates instructor and come to me with shoulder pain soon after, within 6-8 weeks. And it's because they were told to keep their shoulders down at all times and then to lift their arms out to their side while keeping their shoulders down. And my thought is, first of all, your scapula, don't do that. Second of all, you're causing impingement in your shoulder immediately in that subacromial space. No wonder you're in pain. So I'm curious, with the client who comes to that instructor who learned that, maybe they only work with them for 6 months or 6 weeks or 2 sessions, but hears those words, and that becomes a permanent thing in their brain for the next 10 years. I'm sure you've seen that in Pilates, where what was apropos 10 years ago and the standard has done a complete 180 as to what we see today.
Yeah.
And what's being taught today.
Fortunately. I mean, again, our movement stuff evolves. I mean, I've been teaching Pilates since 1989, so it's been, almost 34 years here. And when we first started, there's a lot of dogma. Don't ever let your knee go in front of your toe when you bend your knees, ever. Okay, if you ever watch a slow motion, or you ever get photographs, just sports photographs of almost any sport, of somebody running or moving, tennis player, soccer player, football player, doesn't really matter. That knee is a lot of times it's way past that toe, or it's internally rotated, or it's out of alignment for some reason, because they're dynamically moving.
And that's how we're designed.
That's how we're designed. Fortunately, otherwise we'd all have to walk on treadmills all day. Mm-hmm. We couldn't go around a corner, and we certainly couldn't move quickly to the right or the left. So those kind of dogmas came about mostly out of safety, right? Or out of aesthetics. So the shoulder thing was an aesthetic thing. That long neck, that dancer thing, bring your chest up, that whole vision. You think about a lot of dancers, that's what you've picked. You picture the open chest, at least a classical dancer or a contemporary dancer, not so much, hip hop and other forms. And you get that feeling like the chest is up, the shoulder blades are down, shoulders are back. And what do you get? You get impingement of those shoulders.
Yep.
And you keep that going as you lift that arm up. That's how I was trained. And then that belief system, because that's how people were trained to lift their shoulders, moves into the entire system. And one of the things we're working on, as usual, is evolving those belief systems.
Yep.
Right? Looking at, okay, if I'm lifting my arm up over my head and my scapula does not upwardly rotate, I am going to impinge my acromial, my glenohumeral joint,
Yep.
right? Or my humerus is going to whack into my acromion, and that's going to cause pain and discomfort. So yeah, that's in the process of evolution. To this day, I just taught a course this weekend, yesterday, on exactly this topic. And the light bulbs that were going off in the room, in terms of people going, oh, that's what I need to think of when I lift my arm, was really gratifying, but also horrifying.
I was going to say, that's the scary part, though.
Yeah.
Is how much we see of that. I look at fitness. And the things that we learned from, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding and all of this, which I remind people and remind students and even clients of this, I say, remember that a lot of exercise and fitness that we know was based on bodybuilders from the 60s. It was based on a time before we knew better, before there was much research involvement. And when you think about that, it's a great thing you said just a minute ago about the knees going over the toes. I remind people, try and go upstairs without letting that happen. Try and get out of a chair or off the toilet, especially a lower toilet, without letting that happen. You can't do it. But do I want to do a squat with 300 pounds on my back and have my knees go way out over my toes? No. So there are reasons that rules were said, but the problem is they didn't modify for general life. They were made for one specific purpose.
What were they made for, right? Because a lot of those rules make sense in a certain context.
Exactly.
Right? Again, if I'm loading my back, or if I'm loading my upper body with a whole bunch of anything, and I'm trying to do a squat, and I let my knees really go in front of my toes, I'm going to really increase the stress on my knees.
Yep.
On the other hand, if I'm full body weight and I'm running around a soccer field, I have got to let that happen. Yep. Or I won't be able to make a quick cut and a fast pass and all the things I have to do that.
Exactly.
And it's one of those things where very often when I look at these things and I think about a dogma, whatever it is in fitness or in Pilates, and I think about, okay, what are people saying? Like, what's happening? What are people saying? And then I kind of look at the background of it, and I try to look at where did that come from, understanding the why of it at the time that it was being disseminated, for whatever that is, and then I kind of look at, has that evolved? Has that thinking evolved? Through research, through just talking to people, through understanding movement in a different way. And then how do you disseminate that new information, right? It's just that constant loop of, is this really true?
Well, I don't know if you come across this. I get this all the time because I get women who are now in their 40s, 50s, who used to do aerobics classes. And they come to me with these incredibly bad, and I'm going to say poor, not say bad, poor movement choices and exercise choices. Like every time you do a squat at the top, you're supposed to throw your hips forward, squeeze your butt as tight as you can, and basically compress your spine. They come to me with back pain. Okay, maybe this is something you shouldn't be doing by doing that, but I want to get my glutes involved. Well, anytime you stand up or do a squat, your glute has to be involved. Now, could it need activation? Could we need to wake it up some? Absolutely. But chances are, it's still firing. You don't have to do any more in that movement as soon as we wake it up. But they've learned from that, or crunches from ab classes for doing thousands and thousands and thousands of crunches. They're jamming their neck. Or let's take our hands away, because I learned that a long time ago, yet their neck is straining because their head's in the wrong position, but they were never taught the right thing. So all of these old dogmas that were perpetuated for years and years and years, that now that we as fitness professionals know better, but our clients don't read the research. our clients aren't the ones learning this. We have to be retaught.
When you look at, and Brian and I have both done a lot of reading and a lot of research and a lot of that stuff. When you look at how slowly the movement world has evolved compared to, you look at tech, right? Tech evolves, like a new product comes out every day and everything's Moore's law, everything gets, twice as fast every 2 years, whatever it is. The human body is a dense vehicle. Learning takes time, or it takes repetition to really change the body. And it really takes time for us to take in new information, disseminate it out to all the many people that are teaching, and then have that trickle down into the population at large. One of the things that I've been working on a lot is pain science, modern pain science, which really throws a lot of our old assumptions and most people's assumptions about pain on their head.
And I want that to be at least one, if not multiple, podcasts, because I find the stuff that you've done research on just fascinating.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where you live in an old belief system, and most of the world lives in a very old belief system about pain, for example. And sometimes, we're funny. Sometimes just changing your belief system can change your experience. If any of you haven't had that, that's a little woo-woo, I know, but it's also true that as soon as I have found, even in my own body, like, oh, I really live in a posterior tilt. Okay, so I'm going to try not to be so posteriorly tilted. Right?
In your pelvis.
In my pelvis, right. So when I'm standing, I'm going to think about, okay, so just be a little bit more conscious. And if I move a little forward, like anteriorly tilt my pelvis a little bit, but really bring it to neutral, everything feels better. And it's that kind of awareness that really changes how you work. And to get back to the idea of how do you train a client, right? You create that awareness, you create the potential for them to experience something different. You give them a different experience. That experience is more beneficial to them, or they believe it's more beneficial to them, or you tell them it's more beneficial to them. And that's how the change can happen.
I think the other thing that comes into it, the word that sort of popped in my head immediately was consistency. They need to do something consistently, or else they're never going to make the change. So whether it be changing how they get up out of a chair, or like you said, just standing there in the proper position with a little bit more anterior tilt. If you do it once, yay. But if you're never going to make that a permanent change unless you do it on a regular basis, whether it be by setting an alarm that every 5 minutes, if you're standing, working in the kitchen, be like, ding, oh, that's right, anterior. And you think about it briefly and then go back to what you're doing. Think about it briefly, go back to what you're doing. So you're not harping about it, because that's challenging.
And I want to harp on that for just a moment, because what you were saying about the guy who's like, squeeze your butt, squeeze your butt, squeeze your butt. All of us have the ability, well, some of us anyway, to be obsessive.
Oh, yeah.
Right, we grab on to like one idea, and you just like, that's it, I'm going to change my entire thing today. Today, I'm never going to move my head in this position ever again.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not right either.
No.
The body's a dense medium. It needs to change over time, consistency, regularity. And what I loved what you said, I wanted to really point this out again, is do it for 5 minutes, like set your alarm for a few minutes, or like when I'm trying to change a walking pattern for myself, I walk for one block consciously, then I forget about it. Or X number of buildings or whatever. And then I forget about it. And then I might come back to it again for another block, and then I forget about it. So just like bringing it to your attention, but not obsessing about it.
100%.
Letting the body adapt.
I had a client, great example of this, an overthinker. And from what I've learned in my practice, the smarter a person is, a lot of times the more obsessive they are about a lot of things like this, or the more clueless, one of the two. There's usually not much in between. But he was so obsessive that he had heard something about walking that he needed to do to get his butt engaged. Has to get his butt engaged. Didn't come from me. He came to me after, I guess I saw him on Friday. He came to me the next Tuesday or something, and his back was roaringly inflamed. I said, what have you been doing? Well, he went on like a 5-mile hike, and he loved to hike. And he squeezed his butt every single repetition on that hike, according to him. I said, are you kidding me? and it took us weeks, if not months, to reverse some of what he had done because he was overly doing it. And I said, no, like you said, stoplight to stoplight. You know, I was in a pelvic floor class with our friend Joy Paleo, and we were talking about Kegels. And what I tell people is you're not going to stand there holding it tight all the time. It's like at a stoplight. Okay, you might hold it for a brief moment for the stoplight and then move on. Or if you're at the sink or something, hold it for 10 seconds, let it go. It's about doing it a little bit, establishing the pattern, letting it go. Do a little bit so your awareness becomes more of it. Mm-hmm. I had an employee, I tell this story to other employees sometimes. She gave birth to her second child. Well, after that, her pelvis was thrown off. And she was having SI joint pain a lot. And she had very long legs and loved to stand with her hips slung out to the side. And of course, when you have children, you have a tendency to hold your kid on one hip. So that exacerbated it. So she'd be standing working with a client with her hips slung out. So what I would do is keep these indoor snowballs. They weigh nothing. They are just these puffs of air, basically. But every time I'd see it, I'd throw it at her. And she'd look at me like, what? I said, stand on both feet. But after a week of that, yes,
it was annoying.
It was annoying enough. But you know what? She said after a week, I'm standing on both feet a lot better.
Yeah.
And all I did was draw her attention to it when she was unconscious about it.
Every now and then.
Yes. And it wasn't that I was constantly, no, it was just every now and then, but it gently reminded her, oh yeah, stand on both feet, balance my weight out. Stand on both feet, balance my weight out. So it was something small that if she were able to, focus on it herself in other situations, and obviously she did because she was able to correct it over time, it was all about the consistency and doing it on a regular basis. And no matter what we do and we do on a regular basis, having that consistency is going to lead us to that better movement pattern. Something that I've often wondered about is when we talk about movement, is movement innate or is it a skill that we've learned?
And this is where I kind of do the nature-nurture thing.
Yeah.
Because everybody moves. I mean, most people, unless you're born with some, major structural issues or whatever, like all of us walk.
Yep.
All of us crawl, all of us walk. Maybe not everybody crawls, but everybody walks in very different ways. I mean, walks are just very, very different all over the place. So there are innate patterns. We reach, we grab, we pick up things, like all the things that we do. So there is a nature part of that, right? There is everybody was going to pick up a fork and throw something this way and lift up something that way, brush their hair, brush their teeth, walk here to there. So there is a strong nature part where all of us, every human moves. What's been really interesting to me, I've traveled a lot and taught in a lot of different places, is noting how cultures create different movement patterns. And again, these are very broad generalizations, so don't take this as terrible stereotyping. But for example, when I'm in Italy, or particularly in Italy, there is a culture of dance, of movement, of grace, of sort of sensuality. And a lot of Italians that I've worked with are interested in movement. They're passionate about movement, and they move well. If you've ever talked to an Italian, they really can't talk without moving their hands. Again, a stereotype, so don't get offended, but there's often a lot of movement that's just part of that culture. Mm-hmm. Then I spent a lot of time in the UK. Colder climate, very different culture, and honestly, some of the stiffest
that was my first
people
thought too.
I've ever met. Just, not a lot of mobility, not a lot of grace, less range of motion, no mobility in kind of the pelvis and the hips, very, very stiff generally. And then going to China, where there's a different body structure, just in Asia generally, and noting the differences there. So some of that can be different genetics, but a lot of that is just how you're taught to move by the culture that you grow up in. Mm-hmm. In India and in China, they squat. And less now, but basically a lot of toilets are holes in the ground, and you've got to kind of learn to squat to do a fundamental human function on a pretty regular basis. And so they gain the ability to go into a squat, tends to lengthen out their Achilles, so it's longer than a lot of the other people I know, and they can really get their hips down, essentially on the back of their calves in a deep squat. And that's not like most of my American clients can't do that. Certainly a lot of my Northern European clients can't do that. And some of that structure, but some of it is also, did they start doing that when they were 2 years old? Or have they never done it before?
Yep, exactly. And that's what it comes down to is we do have this innate ability to provide locomotion. We
get from here to there.
From here to there, walking.
We all got to do it.
And everybody walks a little different.
Yeah.
But how I learned this, a professor once brought this to my attention, and it made a whole lot of sense. If you think of any movement pattern from a series of movements A to Z, when you watch a toddler first try and walk, they can't do it at all. They're falling down every step. Okay, and their brain is going A, G, Y, D, Q. It's jumping all around. Then they toddle, and you're watching them, and they're trying to put the pattern together, and then it's more A, B, C, X, Y, Z, L, M, N, O, P, and these movement pattern clusters occur.
They get bits of it.
But eventually, it becomes A, B, C, D, all the way through with every single step. They begin to develop that skill. And it's the same way with throwing a ball or running or whatever we do. You need to have that learned experience. So I sort of think of a lot of things as that skill set that we've learned through either our environment, like you said, being able to squat really deep. I have 2 sons. You'd think they have my genetics. They are so different. They are night and day in their bodies. One of my sons cannot for the life of him be able to squat on the ground with his heels remaining on the ground, and that's okay. My other son, at a young age, butt could be all the way down, heels on the floor, and he would stay there and play for a half an hour. He'd be playing with this and that and twisting and turning, but in that deep squatted position. And my back was, and legs were hurting just watching him. I'm thinking, holy smoke, but he had that innate ability. And I asked my other son, who was just a couple years older, I said, there was no way, shape, or form. His body wouldn't let him.
Yeah.
So it does come down to some structure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some physicality.
Absolutely.
But also that learned experience.
Yeah.
One learned, one didn't. And as you said, in cultures, some learned to squat very deeply. I remember a Filipino man on my way to school every morning. He'd be sitting out in front of his house. His butt was on his heels in a deep squat, and he'd be there when I go to school and when I came home in the exact same position. I thought, how is that possible? He was a very old man. Wow. He'd sit there smoking his little pipe, and he just, sat there. Every time I saw him, every day, I'm thinking but that didn't bother him. He had to be in his 70s.
Wow. And
I'm thinking, here's a guy who's probably not going to need a hip or knee replacement. He's got incredible mobility. Oh my gosh, I wish we could all train to do that. But again, a lot of that I'm sure was structural based too.
Yeah, and one thing we were talking about a little bit when we were planning this episode was looking too at just the differences in different ages and different populations and how you create change and how change is possible.
So do you think that the whole can't teach an old dog new tricks sort of philosophy is true or not? How do you feel about that?
Well, in my own personal philosophy of working with anybody, I try to maintain as much optimism as possible. Yes. It's just my mode. It's like, we're going to start going down this path. I have no idea how far we'll get in terms of making you feel better, move better, et cetera, but I'm going to keep an open mind that change is possible. What's interesting to me, I'm going to take a little slightly different approach here, is thinking about some of the younger people I've trained, particularly the late teens into early 20s, when their bodies are not quite finished yet, right? They're still growing, they're still figuring stuff out, things are changing. It's been so interesting for me to work with that age group because there's, number one, so much potential, so much openness in a way because their body patterns are not usually particularly set, or not in the same way that an older person's are. But they're also sometimes so weirdly discombobulated and discoordinated. Like they haven't really got it all together yet.
The lanky puppy.
The lanky puppy, we used to call them the Bambi dancers,
Yep.
who like their limbs are just not all controlled yet.
Yep. You tell them to squat, and they squat today and tomorrow and the next day are all going to look different.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. And then, so there's that plasticity, right? That kind of, I'm not quite all formed yet. Then you've got kind of the, roughly 25 to maybe 40, or maybe even a little older, but basically 25 to 40-ish, where you've kind of, whatever your physical structure is, it is more or less what your joint shapes and that kind of thing are more or less what they are. Your ligaments are roughly the length they're going to be. You're not remodeling at that deeper level generally from that point. So at that point, it's really looking at movement patterns, right? Is like within your structure, whatever structure you've developed at this point, what can we adapt? Can we increase your hip extension when you walk? Can we increase your shoulder range of motion in abduction, right? What do we have the potential to do based on your structure? And then, honestly, I have to say that so much of that comes down to the mentality of the person. Because I've had 30-somethings that are absolutely don't want to take it on at all and are just resistant to change in every way. And I've had, I think, my favorite 92-year-old client who was, I think, like the niece of Isadora Duncan. Right? And so she grew up at Temple of the Winds in Berkeley doing crazy modern dance stuff with Isadora Duncan. And she was 92, and she moved very slowly. Like everything took longer than it would when you were, younger. But she was absolute game for anything and made wonderful progress at 92.
Yep.
So, and a lot of it was just movement was part of her life, her whole life. And not just movement as a specific thing, but movement is fun. Like the general category, movement is great. I love movement is part of being alive.
Yep.
Right? And she just embraced that.
But we all have clients who are 60 but act 90.
Yeah, and vice versa.
And 90-year-olds who want to act
Who
like
30,
they're 40. Yeah.
Right.
And
sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's crazy.
I had a client who, a lot of shoulder issues. She was 96 or 97. And she blew me away. Her mindset was of a 50-year-old. She was in San Francisco with her great-grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren at the ice cream museum or something like that. Okay. And they had basically what was a ball pit, but it was sprinkles. So they were smaller things. As a mid-90s, she jumped in.
I love it.
Part of me was horrified, but another part was like, good for you.
Yeah.
She said, it took 2 people to get me out.
I love it.
But her grandkids were having so much fun that she wanted to do it. And they called her in, so she just jumped in. And I'm thinking, God bless you. That's so awesome of just a response of, sure, I can do that.
Confidence, physical confidence, curiosity,
right?
Openness.
Whereas we also have the 60-year-olds who will not move. And you ask them to do something, you're like, you ask them to get on the floor, and it's like, okay, I've just asked you, I'm going to remove your right arm. They look at the ground and they say, I don't think I can do that. I'm thinking, it's right there. It's literally, you can see it, right? It's at the bottom of your feet. You can get down there. I will help you up. We have many things I can help you, and they won't do it. So you have that fear response. So when it comes to that, there is a mental component.
I think sometimes it's the biggest part.
Absolutely.
I'd say it's the biggest part a lot of times.
It's one of the biggest inhibitors. And like I said, in prepping for this, I had asked you about, can we reverse some of those, what I call pain inhibiting patterns, that someone who's needed a knee replacement for 5 years, every time they walk upstairs, they hike their hips. Still. They've had both knees replaced.
Right. 5 years ago.
5 years ago. And they're still hiking their hips.
Yeah.
Yet, when they're working with me in the studio, I'm having them do step-ups, and they're doing them perfectly with no problem, up and down, 15 repetitions, nice and strong. But I watch them go outside and walk upstairs, and they hike their hip and barely bend their knee. So how do we go about changing those movement patterns? I think awareness is a big thing. We talked about that, just making them aware of the fact that they still do that. But I'm thinking of one person in particular who still hikes their hips, and they complain about back pain all the time. And I say, well, you're trying to walk stairs with your QL and your erectors. I said, you're not using your legs, those big things underneath your pelvis. I mean, they're super strong. You should be able to use them. And they're not thinking about that. So the awareness isn't coming through on how to do it because they have those old patterns.
You know, I thought about this a lot because, I worked a lot, especially at St. Francis, I'm thinking of, with clients who had, relatively sometimes quite traumatic injuries, big leg breaks or shattered their femurs or whatever. And those patterns, like you would see patterns from when they broke their leg when they were 15 years old, sure, and they're 42 now. Or to your point, with hip and knee replacement, I say that a lot. Like if they really waited a long time for that replacement, I think of a client of mine similar to yours with a hip issue. She was gimping for the whole time from the time I met her. So she had about eight or 10 years of really doing a funky gait to try to minimize hip mobility. After she had her hip replacement, her gait improved maybe 25%, but not all the way. Right, at all, and it was the same reason. It was kind of a fear response and a learned pattern response. So one thing that has always been true and is tricky on this one a little bit is you really have to train exactly what you want them to do. Whatever you're training and, you're getting this stronger and you're getting that moving and they're getting their hips are moving, that's all well and good and that's very useful. But they have to really learn how to apply that in that tricky moment, right? And that's where the pedal meets the metal, because that pattern comes up: stare, challenge, fear, and they go to their old strategy. They can't have confidence in a new strategy yet, right? So oftentimes I've had okay, we're gonna go and we're gonna get you in and out of your car, for example, this one client, because they always had pain getting in and out of their car, and the rest of the time they seemed to be good, and I was trying to figure out what was happening. And then it's like they were just doing a really funky thing every time they get into their car. So we worked on that, and that really was the point, and we changed that, and they got better. But then they've got to commit to it, right? Then that client has got to practice stairs and practice that new pattern in stairs for a while.
What's interesting is 10 years ago, what was the biggest thing in fitness was functional fitness.
Yeah.
It's got to be about function, which you and I have always been about. Their idea of function was to stand on an unstable surface, balance a ball on their head while they're trying to, recite the alphabet or whatever.
Right.
Whereas what you're talking about is true function.
Right.
It's
Can I get up and down from the stairs? Can I get in and out of my car?
It's basically training them at what they need to do on a regular basis,
Yeah.
which is true functional training.
Yeah.
Taking them to the staircase, which is what I had to do with this client. It's like, look, you can do step-ups till the cows come home. You're doing them perfectly. You're balancing at the top. Everything's looking good, but then you can't do stairs. Right. Let's go in the stairwell.
Right.
Let's practice.
Yeah.
Over and over and over for the next 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Until I can make you aware of it enough that maybe you can do it on your own. And we're going to do this for the next 6 weeks and hopefully reverse that pattern a little bit.
Yep.
So yeah. It's truly talking about creating that function, getting in and out of the car, getting in and out of bed,
Yep.
off the toilet, all of these things. I remember a professor once said in class that the worst exercise you could possibly teach a client is a squat. It's the worst thing you could possibly do. And I raised my hand. I was kind of a smart aleck. I still haven't changed, but I raised my hand. And he was like, what? And I said, how do you teach him to get off a toilet then?
Yeah.
And he stopped dead in his tracks and just his head went down and he starts thinking. He goes, no, that's probably the most functional exercise that there is, isn't it? And I could see in that moment I changed his mind. But it literally was taking something that was considered an exercise where in his mind it was putting a bar on your back, overloading the skeletal system, and doing a squat to, how about getting up and down out of a chair, something that's very functional. And that mindset change, I could see I changed it in him and in the class. And later he thanked me. He said, I never really thought about that. And I said, I work with a lot of older people. And he goes, that makes a lot of sense. He was a researcher. He worked in an environment of school where he saw athletes. The people he tested were athletes. There's a difference. So again, he just needed to get out of his comfort zone. But again, he was teaching that as an absolute. And teaching as an absolute doesn't work.
No, not on a squat.
Not something like a squat.
I mean, if you guys are driving and listening to this podcast, for example, try getting out of your car without some moment of a squat in there.
Yeah. No.
I mean, unless you're in a giant, now, a friend of mine has a giant pickup truck, and really you have to kind of slide out of that, and I don't really end up in a squat, right? But if you're in a shorter, lower car, you got to turn around, and you've got to squat to get up and get out.
Without a rope, you're not doing it.
No.
You're not doing it without a squat.
Exactly.
Well, taking that functional
Yeah.
and reversing those patterns, how would you then, for that client, would you try and not only mimic that, but also train? I'm thinking of athletes here
Yeah.
for a second. Okay?
Yeah.
Taking something like the golf swing, for instance. Okay. The golf swing, it has a lot of components to it.
It's complex.
It's incredibly complex, which is why they say one swing thought. That's all you can have at one time. If not, you'll never hit the ball. But if you're training someone to be better at golf, tennis, pickleball, whatever it is, do you train the movement, or do you train a specific exercise for that movement, such as thoracic rotation for the golfer? Do you just focus on that, or do you put them in their stance and get them to try and swing a little farther or move? You know, what do we train for that?
What are we doing for that? Yeah, I mean, this is the trainer's conundrum.
Yeah.
Right, especially if you are training somebody for a specific, athletic or artistic activity. You've got to look at not just the individual bits, but how all those individual bits are going together to deliver whatever you need to deliver at the end of that. When I think about, we'll take golf, because golf's a really good example of a very complex movement.
Very complex.
The golf swing is got everything's moving, everything's going, and dysfunction can happen at any level. Shoulder, torso rotation, pelvic rotation, hip activation, how the feet are standing, like anywhere along the way you can run into trouble. So when I think about that, I think about two things, and I think a lot about if you can identify an area that isn't working. For example, they're not rotating their hips. They're just not. Or they don't have the correct amount of internal and external rotation of the femurs so that the feet can kind of stay planted in the way that they do, and the pelvis can move on top of that.
Right.
Right, then I might really work on just, number one, exploring that range of motion, seeing if they actually have the range of motion necessary to do the job, and then work that range of motion so they get comfortable with that. If it's a stiffness, sometimes you just got to get them used to this can move and it's safe, if it is. So sometimes that can be helpful, but you always have to then apply it back to the swing. On the other hand, if I just keep training the swing, again, very, very complex motor pattern, a lot of things that the body's trying to organize and put together in that movement. So I can't necessarily count on creating radical change with all of those elements going on at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a combination of both. If you can break down a piece of it and get maybe, work on some mobility or work on just getting some strength somewhere, sometimes that can be really helpful. But then applying it back to the swing or back to the stair stepping or back to whatever the functional activity is or athletic activity you're trying to do.
Yeah. Depending on the sport or the skill.
Yeah.
For instance, when it does come to golf, I'm much more a believer in training the exercise because, and I did this a lot during the pandemic because one of the things we could do outside was go and play golf. So I had a lot of my golfers, want to learn more. So I enhanced things that I knew was going to be able to, they'd be able to see immediate change, like thoracic rotation, like getting their glute medius to fire, because obviously they're not. We live so sagittally, we're always moving forward and back, mostly just forward. We don't go side to side much, so they lacked that rotation in the hips.
Oh, and that stability.
And that
to
stability.
Shift the weight the way they need to, because it's a lateral rotational shift.
Right.
Yeah.
They need to shift but not shift.
Yeah.
At the same time.
They
need to have glute medius strength to push off like a baseball pitcher.
Yeah.
You have to have an incredible amount of strength there in your glutes and glute med, in order to do what you need to do. But you can't just continue to do the activity and expect it to get stronger. But you also don't want to say, well, here's a 20-pound club, swing this instead.
Right.
No, that's not going to work either. So for me, I like to break down the movements and take a look and say, okay, what is the person lacking, mobility-wise oftentimes, or strength-wise? What maybe they have too much of. If they're moving too much, how do we work on stability? So I try and break some of that down because, again, there's a lot of complexity to that. But at the same time, you don't want to overload them so much that they begin to try and, like the client who squeezed his butt constantly on the hike, where that's the only thing he's thinking about, and suddenly, his swing is way off the charts. So I almost believe in strengthening and not trying to change their skill, and hoping that the strengthening aspect, the mobility aspect, those things will translate over time rather than adjusting the skill. And what I tell my golfers especially is, I'm not a golf pro.
Yeah.
I'm not a great golfer. Okay.
No.
My body was never made for it, and I started too late in life. But I understand the swing.
Yeah.
And I can make you a better golfer because I can break things down and we can strengthen or move or whatever we need to do. But if you need adjustment within your swing, that's when you need to go to a professional.
I agree. Yeah.
Much like a tennis player.
Yeah.
I can help them with a lot of stuff, torso, ground transfer of
shoulder range of motion, how their back extension works, all that. Yeah.
All of that, exactly. But I'm a big believer in sending them to a professional at what they do. Gait training is another thing. That, can I work with it a little bit? Sure, because I have physical therapists who send people to me and say, oh, they need work on gait, an open chain movement activity, things like that. It's like, okay, I'll do all of that. I am not going to mess with their gait very much. I may put them on the treadmill and see, are they equal on both sides? If not, okay, just think about your right leg a little bit more, and that's all I'm giving them.
It's very general. Just
a general, because you can mess them up so badly by doing something that you're not an expert in. As trainers, I find that there are so many jack of all trades out there, because when we first start out, we need the money, we need the clients, so we'll do anything. Lacrosse, yeah, I'm an expert at lacrosse. I've never seen it played before, much less done it, but sure, absolutely. But you know what? There are experts out there.
So this gets to exactly that point, right? Which is, to reiterate a couple of things, because I think you said it really clearly. If you're working with an athlete, generally, whatever their sport is, whether it's dance or athletics, you don't want to destabilize or discombobulate, basically, how they're doing their sport.
Don't ruin their game.
You don't want to ruin their game, and you can. I have many examples of that from different clients that I've heard of and different teachers that I've talked to. So you don't want to do that. So I like your point about, like, what you can do is assess, analyze, understand maybe, this looks like there's no thoracic rotation happening or whatever the issue is, and work on that piece. But I would, and this is something I started to do towards the end of my time really working in my studio, was I would do all that, but then I would have them just take your stroke. I'm not coaching the stroke. Right, so just to be clear on that, because I have, golf swing and me is like, no, we have no idea what I'm doing. But with dance, I could coach them more deeply because I understand the mechanics of it. Or tennis, same thing. I watch them do it. It's like, okay, just take this into your stroke. See if it feels any different. See if you can get a sense of what that did and what that did for what you're doing.
Yep.
Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that piece out.
No, absolutely.
What is your role and what is your expertise, or what is my expertise, and staying kind of within that lane.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will have them swing just so I can see and what's going on.
Help you analyze and understand.
Absolutely. And, there might be something like, I see this. And it could be something as simple as where their weight transfers on their feet or something.
Right.
So seeing them in action is very good.
Yeah.
But again, I am more of the break it down into the individual components myself. I find a lot of success with that.
Yeah.
Whereas, again, a golf pro would take a look at it from more of the full...
The global perspective rather than the kind of the local perspective. Yeah.
Exactly. So again, by staying in my lane, I know what I'm good at.
Yeah. Good.
And as long as we stay with what we're good at, we can improve other people's movement. We can really enhance all of that. We have to know what we're good at.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Improving movement.
It's not easy. But at the same time, it's not that hard if you understand it.
Well, it's really fun. I mean, because, for me, one of the things I love about teaching movement is every single body is different.
Yep.
And both mentally and physically, right? Mind, body, spirit are all quite different in everybody you're working with. And that puzzle for me of trying to figure out how to communicate with them and how to help them make that change that they want to make. And working with, oh, that's a really odd pelvic structure that I'm looking at there. Right, how do I work with that? So I learned something for all my clients. And I always say the key thing for me is curiosity. That's what keeps me doing what I'm doing as long as I've done it, is open-mindedness, curiosity. What's happening? That question, what's happening there? And then that opens up a whole path of inquiry, if you will, that then leads me to understanding maybe another client that I wasn't quite having results with. And that for me is the path of the movement teacher and the practice of the movement teacher.
Great word, practice, because really that's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing.
It's a continual practice. I've been at this for 30 years. What I know today, physical therapist friend of mine sort of joked and said, our first 10 years in our practice, how many people did we hurt?
It's slightly horrifying. You look back and go, or even just really didn't
know what we were doing.
Give the right advice to, right? You may not have hurt somebody, but you may not have helped them much either.
Exactly. We learn as we go. And in 30 years, I've learned a lot. And we're continuing to learn. It is a practice. We're practicing every single day on the clients in front of us. I love it when I get a client who is a unique challenge, something I've never had before.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I've seen so many low backs that when someone sits in front of me and they say, "Is there any hope?" I'm like, "Oh, please, this is easy. Trust me. Give me time."
I'm just going to say yes.
Yeah.
Maybe time. You're going to have to do some work, but yeah.
Yeah.
I've made many, many, many clients better over time.
Yeah, we can do this. But there may be something like, wow, okay. And as a little, one of my clients called me a body detective. It's sort of like, yeah, this is cool. Let's figure this out together because we can. And those are the fun people.
Those are the fun people.
Those are the ones that really
Those ones that stimulate you, right? They make you go home and look at the internet, right? Do a little Google search. Try to figure out what the heck is going on there.
Yep.
Has anybody ever seen this before?
Wake up
or
at 5 a.m.
Talk to you. Yeah. Wow, that'll make sense. Or talk to an MD. Like I've got a couple, resources in my back pocket that I'm like, what is happening here? What does this thing mean? And what is that? What are the ramifications of it?
Yep. And so that's really what we're doing. We're practicing. We're practicing our trade. And we're getting better. And I think as we do this, we're also getting better at analyzing movement.
Yeah.
Because we're always learning through that.
Yeah.
And that's what this podcast is all about. It's going to be really trying to understand movement. And over the next umpteen weeks, we're going to break down different topics. We're going to talk about low back pain. We're going to talk about arthritis. We're going to talk about, osteoporosis and pelvic floor discomfort and pain and women's health issues and all sorts
and
of
training
topics.
Strategies and thinking about proprioception and thinking about how you develop strength. So, it's not just going to be rehabilitation oriented, but we're also going to include just information that's useful for all of your clients and for you just to understand some of these concepts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
beautiful.
It's about us learning too, because we are curious.
Yep.
We want to learn. When you and I would get together, we would have these 4 or 5 hour conversations sometimes, and it's all about learning, because I'd be learning from you, you're learning from me, and sometimes it's just talking through theories.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this. What do you think about that? And that's what we're going to be doing on a weekly basis. So thank you guys for joining us.
Yep, thanks for joining us, and come on down and join us for the next one.
Absolutely. If you like what you heard, come on back. This is our first show. We're going to get better as we go. Trust us. We're going to get more comfortable and more used to it. Fortunately, we're good friends and we're just talking. So we have social medias. Our show is called Moving Conversations. Moving Convos is on Instagram and Twitter. Moving Convos at gmail.com. Also Facebook at Moving Convos. And I'm here with Nora St. John. I'm Brian Ritchie. So please, if you like us, give us a good review and meet us here again next week.